For 100 millennia, humanity was absent. Their colonies lay abandoned, drifting silently in the void. Their once bustling stations, now ghostly monuments to a species long thought extinct. The galaxy moved on, cataloging their disappearance as a minor historical anomaly, a curiosity in the annals of interstellar civilizations. Scholars debated theories with passionate intensity: cosmic catastrophe, a self-imposed exile, an experiment in isolation, or even eradication by forces unknown. Each argument was more imaginative than the last, yet none carried proof. No signals, no ships, no signs of life. Humanity had vanished as completely as if they had been erased from existence itself. In their absence, the galaxy had grown confident, arrogant even. Civilizations that had once existed in cautious parity with Terran colonies expanded into the vacuum left behind. Systems formerly under Terran jurisdiction were seized without resistance. Mining colonies were claimed, and trade routes that humans had maintained with ingenuity and tenacity were appropriated by alien empires. Governments that had once respected human diplomacy now laughed at the idea of Terran ingenuity or resilience. Humans had become nothing more than footnotes in history, a species to be studied in texts, their legends dismissed as myth or exaggeration. Even in the academic circles that remembered them, humans were a cautionary tale, a warning of what once existed but no longer mattered. Their achievements, technology capable of planetary defense, interstellar communication faster than light, innovations in adaptive energy and materials were admired superficially, but no one believed such advancements could return. Generations of scientists, engineers, and historians had grown up with the assumption that humans were gone forever, and they planned, built, and expanded their civilizations accordingly. And yet, humanity had not vanished. They had withdrawn strategically, retreating into hidden regions of space that were uncharted, unmonitored, and inaccessible to alien fleets. There, in the forgotten corridors of the galaxy, humans had survived. They had endured cosmic storms, resource scarcity, and the isolation of entire star systems. They had perfected their technology in secret, refining the ships, weapons, and systems that the galaxy had once assumed belonged to myths. Every generation of humans had lived with one truth: the galaxy would forget them, but it would also underestimate them. Every culture, every story, every legend passed down through the millennia was a form of encoded strategy. Tales of starborn Terran, stories of human resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability were not mere entertainment. They were warnings, reminders, and records of tactics, technologies, and philosophies designed to endure in memory, in myth, and in preparation for the day they would return. The Terrans' patience was a weapon. Every colony, every hidden fleet, every covert research station existed not merely to survive, but to prepare. Generations studied the galaxy from the shadows. They analyzed alien fleets, governments, trade patterns, and military doctrines with the precision of a species that had long understood that survival required knowledge, not brute force. Human engineers had perfected technologies thought impossible: energy shields capable of bending and refracting the most advanced weaponry, propulsion systems that could evade detection across multiple light years, and weapons that could disable entire fleets without causing indiscriminate death. These systems were built for one purpose: to make the legends real when the time came. During these millennia of absence, humans became almost mythical themselves. Entire civilizations regarded their disappearance as proof of human weakness or folly. Empires debated whether humanity had destroyed itself or had been destroyed, assuming the latter with smug confidence. Some even celebrated, claiming that the galaxy was finally free from the unpredictability of Terran cunning. The arrogance of these civilizations would be their undoing. Even as humans were absent from the galaxy's eyes, they were far from idle. Deep in hidden corridors, they cultivated fleets, trained generations of officers, and refined the strategic doctrines that would one day become their arsenal of inevitability. Every simulated battle, every tactical exercise, and every contingency plan was tested against the galaxy's known powers, ensuring that when humanity returned, they would be ready to confront any force, any fleet, any empire, with perfect timing and overwhelming effect. The galaxy believed they were gone. It believed that history had moved on. It assumed that the absence of humans meant weakness, that the passage of time had eroded their capabilities. But the Terrans had endured not as a diminished species, but as one sharpened, prepared, and perfected by time itself. Every legend whispered across the stars, every story dismissed as myth, had been honed into truth. Every warning encoded in tales of human cunning and survival was about to be realized. Then, as civilizations celebrated their assumed dominance, subtle anomalies began to appear in the void fluctuations in hyperspace lanes, energy signatures too precise to be natural, ghostly communications that vanished before analysis. Some fleets reported phantoms moving across star systems, glimpses of technology beyond comprehension. These occurrences were dismissed at first, catalogued as sensor errors or cosmic phenomena. But the anomalies persisted, and the galaxy began to sense, without fully understanding, that the starborn Terrans had not vanished. Humanity had waited. They had watched. They had endured. And now, after 100 millennia, they were preparing to remind the galaxy why their legends had been feared, why their myths had existed, and why their absence had always been temporary. The empires that had assumed they were masters of the stars were about to discover, in ways they could not anticipate, that humanity had returned. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same. For decades after the Terrans' disappearance, the galaxy had grown confident in its assumptions. Fleets patrolled sector after sector. Trade routes expanded without fear of piracy, and colonies prospered under the protection of empires who assumed humanity was gone forever. Yet subtle signs began to emerge: fluctuations in hyperspace lanes, energy readings that could not be explained by natural phenomena, and brief communications that appeared, vanished, and reappeared across multiple sectors simultaneously. These anomalies were initially dismissed as sensor errors, cosmic storms, or even intentional deceptions by rival species. Scientists speculated, officers scorned the reports, and bureaucrats catalogued them as curiosities. Yet the pattern persisted. Systems long believed dormant suddenly displayed signs of advanced technological activity. Derelict Terran colonies, untouched for millennia, registered sudden bursts of energy, artificial constructs appearing as if awakened from a long slumber. Satellites, long thought inactive, emitted faint pulses that hinted at adaptive self-repairing systems. The first true indication of humanity's return occurred near the former colony of Erythra, a strategically located system now under the control of a coalition of empires that had filled the void left by humans. The coalition's fleet, composed of dozens of warships ranging from light cruisers to super-heavy dreadnoughts, approached the system in what they assumed would be a routine show of force. Sensors swept the void for signs of life, Probes scouted distant planets, and war coordinators reviewed battle simulations designed to predict Terran strategies, though these simulations were based entirely on outdated assumptions and myths, as the humans had long been forgotten. Then it began. The human fleet appeared simultaneously across multiple hyperspace lanes, emerging from the void with a coherence and precision that defied logic. Sensors registered ships materializing in formation, their hulls gleaming with adaptive alloys and energy patterns beyond the understanding of alien engineers. Ships of all classes, from small reconnaissance craft to massive planetary strike carriers, maneuvered as a single organism. Each vessel moved in perfect synchrony, with a grace that suggested not just technology, but a singular intelligence guiding every action. The Coalition fleet opened fire, confident in their overwhelming numbers and advanced weaponry. Plasma lances cut through the darkness, ion cannons flared, and gravitic disruptors spiraled toward the Terran Armada. For a moment, it seemed that the humans might be overwhelmed, that the myths of old would prove hollow. But the Terran fleet did not falter. Energy fields shimmered and bent around the ships, diverting destructive force harmlessly into the void. Missiles dissolved mid-flight, disintegrating before reaching their targets. Entire squadrons of alien fighters stalled in confusion, as propulsion systems and weapons were neutralized before they could react. The Terran flagship, a massive and sleek vessel of black and silver, with veins of glowing adaptive energy coursing along its hull, moved to the center of the Coalition formation. It did not fire immediately. It did not signal with arrogance or provocation. Its presence alone reshaped the battlefield. The aliens found their perfectly calculated strategies failing, their centuries of training rendered meaningless against an enemy that anticipated their every move. Then the first strike was executed, not in fury, not in chaos, but with surgical precision. A dreadnought at the heart of the Coalition formation was disabled. In an instant, engines offline, communications dead, weapons frozen. The fleet froze in shock. Nothing had exploded, no planets had been harmed, and yet the effect was total. The Terrans had demonstrated their power, and in that single calculated act, the myths became reality. A transmission cut across the Coalition's network, crisp and commanding. "We have returned. You believed our absence meant weakness. You were wrong. Resistance is futile. Comprehension is required." For the first time in millennia, the Coalition's officers experienced true terror. Generals debated orders, fleet commanders hesitated, and entire squadrons stopped in disbelief. No simulation, no historical precedent, no tactical doctrine could account for what they were seeing. The starborn Terrans, legends dismissed as fantasy, were alive, and every action they took confirmed their perfection in strategy, technology, and foresight. From that moment, the battlefield changed. The Terrans did not indiscriminately destroy. Their strikes targeted command hubs, weapon systems, and propulsion arrays. Civilian populations and colonies were untouched. Every move was calculated, deliberate, and terrifyingly effective. The Coalition's leaders realized in horror that they were not fighting an enemy. They were witnessing a species exercising absolute control over events they could barely perceive. The anomalies that had haunted the galaxy for decades were no longer mysteries. They were the harbingers of a return. The first glimpses of a force that had waited patiently, learned, adapted, and perfected itself across 100 millennia. And now, the Terran Armada was here, turning myth into reality. The legends of humanity, the stories of resilience, ingenuity, and indomitable will were no longer distant tales. They had materialized, unstoppable, inevitable, and undeniable. The galaxy would never again underestimate the starborn Terrans. The Coalition fleets, once confident in their superiority, were paralyzed within moments of the Terran Armada's emergence. Their numbers, their firepower, and their centuries of tactical experience were irrelevant against a force that operated with perfect foresight and precision. Where alien fleets relied on reflex, reaction, and brute force, the humans relied on strategy, anticipation, and the meticulous execution of centuries of preparation. The Terran flagship, massive and sleek, led the Armada with silent authority. Its hull shimmered with adaptive energy fields that deflected plasma, ion, and gravitic assaults, bending enemy fire harmlessly into the void. Smaller Terran vessels wove between the alien ships, appearing and disappearing across sensor arrays, their movements almost imperceptible. Each maneuver disrupted formations, neutralized weapon systems, and forced the Coalition to react to threats that were already impossible to counter. Then came the first deliberate strike. A Coalition dreadnought, one of the largest and most powerful in the sector, suddenly froze mid-battle. Its engines ceased, weapons locked in stasis, and communications went silent. Crew members stared at displays that failed to respond, panic rising as the reality of the situation set in. The dreadnought had not been destroyed, only incapacitated, but the message was clear. The humans could disable fleets without firing indiscriminately, and no defense could withstand their precision. The Terran flagship transmitted across the Coalition networks, its voice calm, unwavering, and chilling in its clarity. "We have returned. You assumed our absence meant weakness. That assumption was a mistake. Resistance is no longer a choice. Comprehension is required. You will learn." Alien officers froze at the transmission, their eyes wide with disbelief. Fleet commanders argued in vain, attempting to reorganize squadrons whose engines and weapon systems had already been neutralized. Every countermeasure they deployed failed before it could even be implemented. The humans had predicted every strategy, anticipated every contingency, and moved with an efficiency that no simulation or historical precedent could emulate. The Terran Armada advanced methodically, striking only where necessary. Orbital weapons platforms were disabled, supply lines severed, and communication networks dismantled. Civilian populations remained untouched. The humans did not destroy recklessly. They imposed order, judgment, and inevitability. Every movement reinforced the legends of the starborn Terrans: precision, intelligence, adaptability, and resilience incarnate. As the battle unfolded, entire fleets were rendered inert. Cruisers drifted silently, their propulsion systems frozen, their weapons offline. Command ships, designed to coordinate entire sectors, were paralyzed, leaving the Coalition's forces in chaos. Panic spread from one ship to another, until what had begun as confidence turned into terror. Officers questioned their knowledge, their experience, even their perception of reality. The humans had not just engaged, they had demonstrated mastery over strategy, technology, and the battlefield itself. The Terran fleet's movements were almost ritualistic in their perfection. Smaller vessels targeted engines and weapons, medium ships neutralized defenses, and the flagship struck command hubs with precision strikes that left fleets incapacitated without causing unnecessary destruction. Every action was calculated, every effect anticipated. Even the most advanced alien AI systems failed to predict the Armada's maneuvers. By the end of the engagement, the Coalition fleets were in shambles. The once proud dreadnoughts and cruisers floated silently, incapacitated but not destroyed. Command chains were broken, fleets immobilized, and officers left in stunned disbelief. Entire sectors had witnessed a force that had waited, prepared, and returned not in haste or anger, but in perfect execution. The legends of human ingenuity, patience, and tactical mastery were no longer stories, they were reality. The psychological impact on the galaxy was profound. News of the battle spread instantly through surviving networks. Empires, governments, and colonies learned of the Terran Armada's precision, discipline, and restraint. The myth of the starborn Terrans had become undeniable, a force the galaxy could not ignore, underestimate, or hope to defeat. In this single engagement, humanity had done more than win a battle. They had rewritten the rules of interstellar warfare. The Armada's victory was not measured in destruction, but in control, mastery, and inevitability. The Exarathi and allied fleets were defeated not by numbers or rage, but by the principle of anticipation, preparation, and precision, the very qualities that had allowed humans to endure 100 millennia of absence and emerge stronger than ever. The galaxy now understood that the legends were real. The starborn Terrans had returned, and their armada could not be stopped. Those who had assumed humanity was gone, weak or irrelevant, would soon learn that patience, intelligence, and foresight were more deadly than any fleet or weapon ever conceived. The myth had arrived on the battlefield, and the galaxy would never be the same. The aftermath of the first engagement rippled across the galaxy like shockwaves through space-time. What had been a confident coalition, certain of its superiority, was shattered within moments. Entire fleets drifted inert, their engines disabled, weapons locked, and communications silenced. Command structures, previously considered flawless, crumbled as officers struggled to comprehend the impossibility before them. Panic spread from the battlefield to distant sectors, infecting governors, admirals, and diplomats alike. The galaxy's ruling elites realized, with dawning horror, that centuries of arrogance had left them unprepared for a species that had mastered patience, precision, and inevitability. Governments convened emergency councils, attempting to salvage authority and restore the semblance of control. Strategic analyses were conducted in haste, but every model, every simulation, every contingency plan failed to predict the Terran Armada's return. Fleets that had ruled entire sectors froze in indecision. Trade routes stalled, markets fluctuated wildly, and political debates erupted over how to respond to an enemy whose power had been underestimated for millennia. Scholars wrote of human ingenuity in awed tones, while generals cursed the arrogance that had dismissed the starborn Terrans as myths. In the wake of the Armada's actions, the consequences were immediate and tangible. Colonies that had been oppressed under alien dominions began to act independently. Local governors, previously loyal to centralized authority, hesitated in their duties, unsure whether obedience would guarantee survival or provoke retaliation. Trade networks, previously dictated by fear, reorganized as merchants reassessed the balance of power. Fleets that had once operated under strict hierarchies discovered their control had been shattered, and no chain of command could restore it. The Terran strategy was deliberate. Humanity did not seek indiscriminate destruction. Orbital defenses were disabled, not obliterated. Dockyards producing super-heavy warships were neutralized, but their crews remained unharmed. Civilian populations were untouched. Every strike, every maneuver, Every action reinforced a single truth. Humans wielded power with judgment, intelligence, and restraint. The galaxy began to realize that ultimate strength was not measured solely in firepower, but in the ability to impose order, execute strategy flawlessly, and exercise control with surgical precision. Alien scholars and strategists scrambled to analyze the implications. Military doctrines that had been considered infallible for centuries were rendered obsolete by the Armada's maneuvers. Fleet formations, tactical hierarchies, and interstellar communications were all re-evaluated in light of a species that had mastered anticipation and coordination to a degree that no other civilization could match. Philosophers debated the moral and existential ramifications of humans who could incapacitate entire fleets without unnecessary casualties. The Terran's mastery of foresight and judgment challenged every preconception of power in the galaxy. Across the sectors, the collapse was systemic. Intelligence networks faltered as communication channels became unreliable. Entire administrative systems froze as governors questioned whether their instructions would provoke human reprisal. Economic structures destabilized as merchants hesitated to move goods along routes that had previously been considered secure. The galaxy's stability, long taken for granted, was now a fragile illusion threatened by the certainty of Terran capability. The psychological impact was profound. Fear, awe, and disbelief coursed through every level of alien society. Commanders who had once prided themselves on perfect control now doubted their judgment. Advisors whispered of errors in centuries-old intelligence, questioning how a species presumed extinct could return with such overwhelming dominance. Even the most loyal bureaucrats recognized that the Terran presence had permanently altered the rules of engagement. Authority, previously unquestioned, was now fragile and uncertain. Humanity, meanwhile, moved with calculated patience. The Armada did not linger to occupy or enforce control. Systems were left intact, planets unharmed, and trade networks undisturbed. Their message was clear. Dominance did not require tyranny, conquest, or indiscriminate destruction. Control was exercised through strategy, precision. Entire sectors understood that the humans had returned not merely to fight, but to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy permanently. Legends of the starborn Terrans, once dismissed as exaggerations or myths, became living reality. Every civilization now knew that humans were not only real, but had returned with capabilities that exceeded any expectations. Fleets were paralyzed by the certainty of human judgment, governments by the certainty of human foresight, and populations by the knowledge that the legends were true. The galaxy, once complacent in its arrogance, was forced to reconsider every assumption it had made for centuries. In the quiet aftermath, as the Terran Armada prepared for further operations, a new order emerged. Alien powers were cautious, hesitant to challenge a species whose intelligence, patience, and capability had proven absolute. Entire civilizations recalibrated their strategies, acknowledging that the humans had returned not just to fight, but to establish the inescapable fact that arrogance toward humanity would have consequences no empire could withstand. The collapse of the Dominion's authority was not immediate destruction. It was systemic, psychological, and lasting. Civilization after civilization understood a simple, immutable truth: underestimate humanity, and the consequences would be total, inevitable, and absolute. The Armada had acted with precision, not fury, and in doing so, had imposed a new paradigm upon the galaxy. By the end of this segment of the campaign, One undeniable fact was clear. The galaxy would never again treat humanity as weak, absent, or irrelevant. Legends had been realized. Myths had become history. And the star-born Terrans had returned to ensure that no empire, no fleet, and no civilization would forget it. After the Terran Armada had systematically demonstrated its dominance across multiple sectors, a quiet, deliberate withdrawal began. Unlike other empires that celebrated conquest through occupation or colonization, humanity did not linger. Their ships, vast and imposing, retreated into hidden hyperspace corridors, leaving behind disabled fleets, inert weapon systems, and a galaxy forever altered by their presence. The withdrawal was not a retreat. It was the final act in a demonstration of absolute control, a message that humanity did not need to occupy worlds to ensure compliance or respect. Their influence would persist, not through force, but through the certainty of their capability. In the aftermath, alien civilizations scrambled to comprehend what had occurred. Fleets that had once dominated entire sectors remained paralyzed. Dockyards that had churned out warships for centuries lay silent, and command structures struggled to restore coherence. Politicians, strategists, and philosophers all arrived at the same realization. The Terrans had returned not merely as a fighting force, but as an example of what an entire species could achieve when intellect, patience, and foresight were applied to the art of strategy. Trade resumed slowly, but with caution. Governors no longer assumed loyalty could be coerced with threats alone. Entire star systems recalibrated their political, economic, and military priorities, conscious that any miscalculation could invite human intervention. Even neutral civilizations, previously untouched by the conflict, recognized that the mere memory of the Terran Armada was enough to influence policy, reshape alliances, and redefine the limits of ambition. Humanity's impact was systemic and enduring. The legends of the starborn Terrans became living doctrine. Historians chronicled their return with awe, describing not only the technological and tactical supremacy of the Armada, but the deliberate restraint exercised in every engagement. Military academies across the galaxy attempted to replicate the humans' precision and foresight, yet every simulation fell short. The Terrans had mastered what no other civilization could: the capacity to enforce inevitability without succumbing to chaos, and to wield immense power without unnecessary cruelty. Even the Dominion itself, once unassailable, reeled from the psychological impact. Leaders who had prided themselves on centuries of unchallenged authority now approached governance with caution and humility. Military planners adjusted doctrines, focusing not only on strength but on anticipation, adaptability, and the understanding that a species like humanity could appear where and when it was least expected. The memory of the Armada's surgical strikes and the impossibility of countering them became a permanent feature in strategic planning, a shadow over every decision. Civilians, too, bore witness to the consequences of human return. Planets previously under authoritarian control experienced liberation, not through occupation, but through the neutralization of oppressive military infrastructure. Supply lines were restored to normalcy, communication networks stabilized, and governance systems re-established themselves in the absence of interference. Humanity's intervention had been merciful yet absolute precision over destruction, judgment over chaos. As the Armada receded into the far reaches of uncharted space, whispers spread through the stars. Stories of their appearance circulated among fleets, colonies, and councils. The myths that had persisted for millennia were now incontrovertible fact. Humanity had vanished, only to return stronger, wiser, and unassailable. The legends were real. The star-born Terrans had walked among the galaxy, and they had demonstrated that no empire, no fleet, and no civilization could ever presume them gone or insignificant. In private, human commanders reflected on the campaign. There was no triumphalism, no need for celebration, only satisfaction in the perfection of execution. The Armada's actions had been precise, purposeful, and complete. They had returned to enforce a lesson, not to subjugate. Every fleet neutralized, every system liberated, every command structure incapacitated was a statement humanity had endured, and it would not be forgotten. The galaxy, once arrogant in its assumption of Terran absence, had learned its first lesson. Legends can become reality. Myths can walk among the stars, and a species that endures through millennia of absence emerges with a mastery that no other can challenge. The humans had returned not for vengeance, not for conquest, but to assert a simple truth: underestimate humanity at your peril. Generations of civilizations would remember this return. Every fleet commander, every political leader, and every strategist would teach their successors the story of the starborn Terrans, how they vanished, how the galaxy forgot, and how they returned with an armada no one could stop. The Armada's withdrawal did not diminish its influence, it amplified it. Every empire now existed in the shadow of humanity's inevitability. The Terrans had vanished for 100 millennia. They had returned with a fleet beyond imagination. And though their ships receded into the void, their legacy endured permanently, reshaping the galaxy's balance of power, its politics, and its understanding of what it meant to be truly unstoppable. The myth was no longer myth. The legends had come alive. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same.